And welcome to the continuing series, What I Tell My Brother About Money. This is the same cute picture that we saw before, me in 1970s. I think you can recognize it from the garb, protecting my little brother, Kirk, or holding him. The reason I like this idea is because my brother is not in the financial field. So I think from that perspective, it's interesting to hear from someone who is, and trying to explain it in a way that I want my brother to learn things and then do them, what I would say, properly. As we start any field, when you're talking about expertise, I think it's really, really critical that we just start right away with a simple disclaimer. And that disclaimer is, this is a general source of information. It's important that we consider that because really this, especially when I'm going to talk today about investing, is one of those areas where it's very easy to make mistakes, and following some general advice can get you into lots of trouble. If you've ever had a custom suit, or if you've ever had a custom shirt or blouse, had something customized for you, and you realize, wow, it just fit you perfectly. That's the difference, I think, in this term, is that going to a tailor, having someone who's actually going to review where you are, what your goals are, really makes a difference. So this one, disclaimer is always important. On this one, really important. So what are we going to cover today? Well, I think we're going to cover what I would tell my brother about investing, what I would say to consider and to make sure that he can maintain that confidence. You might recognize this roller coaster. I love this slide, particularly for investing. And I say that because investing can feel like this at times. I don't think that's the type of ride that most people want to be on when they're looking at investing. Sure, maybe we like to get to the top, but the ride down. So how can we avoid that? And again, keep this image in mind. I have a different view of what I think this is like in the future. Do you know what? I've been doing this since last century. This is my 22nd year in the industry, and let me give you this in summation. There's always bad news. There's always bad news. I picked some really nice headlines, really from the last decade, a little bit longer than that. It really is important to see that there's always something for the media to focus on. Now, you can look at the far one on the right there at the bottom, a little COVID globe, and think, this is different. It is in a way, and yet maybe it isn't. Maybe we're already coming out of it. There's certainly market analysis who would say that. But it's actually the one that I'd like to go back to. My favorite one in this one is the Acropolis Now. It's the Greece bankruptcy, because at the time that took so many headlines. And at the end of the day, that's a decade past, and it really hasn't impacted us as investors here in Canada. And that's important to consider. Yeah, if we're in Greece, we probably feel very different about this. But in Canada, this really hasn't had the impact. And really, when the media is doing this, they're projecting forward. And what they're projecting is true. If this continues, we'll go down to zero. And yet, it does never continue. There is, though, a huge emotional toll on us when we're managing our investments. And it moves up this slide. I love this one. If you remember, just back to January this year, you were probably in the jubilation stage, right at the height of that roller coaster. You would have had great returns for the last few years. So wonderful. And then if you follow that down, you get to March and you get to this dejected, oh my goodness, will it ever recover? Am I going to be able to do the things I want to do? Do you know what I'm the most proud of? I had one client, who took a little bit of money out of her TFSA during this period. Everyone else stayed put because they realized these are the emotions that happen, and the emotions are fine. The critical thing, point one that I tell my brother, manage your emotions. Don't make decisions at the time of emotion, because that's never typically going to lead to good results. And we know a story about the investment market, and maybe some facts if we want to say it that way. 7 out of 10 years, the market makes money. 7 out of 10 years, the market makes money. Here's the thing. I had a client and they were looking and looking. He was like, got it closer to the screen. Like, what are you looking for? Well, I said, I'm looking for 2020, 2021, 2022. And I had to laugh. I said, they're not there. But we know the markets make money. We just don't know in 2020 if that's going to be it. Over this decade, what the 7 years that are likely going to be positive are, but they generally happen. And when you look at this curve again, if you're familiar with bell curves, you realize the slope is actually on the right side. Actually, the markets favor us to make money most years. That's not every year. But that is why you hear people like Warren Buffett, when they say stay invested, which is point two, stay invested. They're really talking about the long-term benefits of being in the market. The market. I keep talking about the market. I want you to pretend I got a jar of jelly beans. It's got all these different colors. And I'm just going to shake it up, and I'm going to ask you what color is going to come to the top. And your answer should be, I don't know. And then I grab the jar again, and I shake it again, and I say, what color is going to come to the top? We still don't know. When we're talking about investing, point three, diversify, diversify, and diversify. Have a little piece of each, because if you can follow up at the top left, there is Canadian small caps, Canadian small companies. And what you see is it goes all over this. There's not really a discernible pattern. At the top left, it was the top performing investment in 2010. And yet in 2014 and 2015, it's the worst performing investment. So what's the point? Have that jar of jelly beans and just make sure you have a little piece of each. And then every year, rather than you shake it, you reallocate. It's called asset allocation, essentially having a little piece of everything, not trying to bet on who's going to be the top performer, but what markets are going to perform overall, and then having a piece of those markets. Most people, as we look at this, will have 2,000 plus companies that they're invested in around the globe. That is a very diversified portfolio. And that is the most important part. Actually, it's where most of your return comes from, where we'd all like to think, oh, I could pick the next Apple or the next Zoom, as a matter of fact. The reality is it doesn't happen very often, if at all. In fact, I met a gentleman who was in his 50s, who by the time he was in his mid-20s had earned $1 million in the stock market. When I met him, he had less than $5,000 because he'd never diversified. He thought that first strategy worked so well and he'd hit a home run. He actually never diversified. We see that with oil and gas as well, right? For sure. You can hit a few home runs and then think, oof, I know how to play this game, and then really lose your shirt. Why would I stress this part to my brother? Because point three about asset allocation, studies showed accounts for about 90% of your return. I would repeat that to him. 90% of your return is just being diversified around the globe and then rebalancing those jelly beans. And once you have that, when we say be patient and be in the markets, then you can do that. This is such a wonderful idea, because I would wrap up all the things that I've said with my brother and say, once you're properly diversified, you're not going to let emotions run your investments. You know that the market story is positive. Don't try to get rich quick. It's a patience. It is a system that rewards patience. When I'm talking to clients, and specifically new clients, I ask them always about their 5 and 10 year returns. About my 5 and 10 year returns, I said, once you have that diversification and you're redoing that asset allocation, you should be doing an analysis, but probably about every 5 years, and then just comparing yourself and how you're doing it. And it's really good to do shortly after a market correction. So about right now, to see, did I have the right mix to sort of weather this storm? Because know that there's no way, Leonardo is telling us this, that we can get rich really quick without probably getting into trouble. Patience, important. I always smile about this particular idea because when I'm sharing it with clients, I said, what I'd like you to do is, if you could mentally put your happy face, you and your partner or your family, in the middle of that. The critical part is, what do you want to achieve this investment return for? And that gets so many people into trouble because they get into, I just want more money. To do what with? Are you trying to get ready for your retirement? Are you trying to make sure that you can put your kids through school, maybe education, major expenditure? There's a very big difference on the price of schooling. Every conversations about that. Have you done risk planning? Like, it doesn't matter if you've got a great investment. If you don't have the right type of risk or insurance and something happens in your life, you're gonna have to sell that investment. Oof. I spent a lot of time, and I always do with my clients, talking about managing cash flow, because cash flow is critical. Business, preserving the state, all good conversations. It really goes back to, when you're investing, know what you're doing it for. What are you trying to achieve in terms of those points? And this is what I feel the ride should look like. When you're properly diversified, when you know the market will win, when you know that you're going to redo your asset allocation at least annually and take a look every 5 years at your returns, and you are patient, you're in a much gentler ride. And as I talked about, the fence is deliberate. The fence is very deliberate. What you're seeing there is it needs some protection along the way. I like to point out to clients when we're talking about investments, you can still get dizzy on a carousel. You can, but it's not the same as that roller coaster, and a much better ride as you go along. That's what I tell my brother about investing. What would I tell you about investing? Probably very different. So if you have some questions, pause this part of the YouTube. You can reach out to me by email, you can reach out by telephone, and certainly I'll be happy to talk to you and answer your specific pieces. I look forward to talking to you again next month when we talk a little bit more about what I tell my brother about money. Have a great day.